Hi, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started here. Thank you all for coming. One thing I wanted to point out before we get started is that today is called an Outside the Box instead of a Life on Tap. For our Life on Tap series, we bring back alumni to speak to you about their career trajectories and how they got to where they are from here at Christendom. And so today we have somebody who is not an alum to share his perspective and to share his insights. And you guys have probably seen the flyer that he's going to speak about living Catholic business values in a secularized world. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our esteemed speaker. Mr. Tom Jones is Corporate Vice President and President of Northrop Grumman's Aeronautics Systems Sector, a premier provider of military aircraft, autonomous systems, aerospace structures, and next-generation solutions with major operations throughout the United States. Previously, Jones was Sector Vice President and General Manager of Airborne Sensors and Networks, as well as for Advanced Concepts and Technologies. And he was Vice President of the company's Undersea Systems Business Unit 2. Prior to joining Northrop Grumman in 2011, Jones served as Director of the Boeing Company's Marine Systems Department, with responsibility for a wide variety of high technology, undersea system solutions, and services for government and commercial customers. Jones holds a bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical engineering from Kansas State University, and he and his wife are co-founders of a nonprofit called the Dignity Mandate, and produced the documentary Shining the Light on Physician-Assisted Suicide. He is on the National Board of Young Catholic Professionals and is active in Legatus and the Lumen Circle. Please welcome Mr. Tom Jones to the stage.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me out here today. Few notes. I always feel strange when someone reads a biography and they keep on calling me Jones, but it turns out that is a Wall Street Journal standard, so all the executives in the company have to be called Jones over and over again. I prefer to just be called Tom, but anyways. Second note, generally, I talk to rooms full of engineers who know a lot of technical stuff and not very much about anything else. So I'm usually able to throw in a reference to, some philosopher or economist, and they're really wowed and think I'm really smart. And I'm somewhat at a disadvantage today because I'm with a bunch of people who actually know about all that. So I don't have that go-to to make it seem like I really know what I'm talking about. But anyways, once again, thank you. I'd like to start off just a little bit of extra information, and I'll explain why I'm sharing this with you in a second. So the role I have right now is President of the Aeronautics Sector. Northrop Grumman, we're S&P, I think, 98 on the Standard & Poor's list right now, so we're in the S&P 100. The sector I run is basically responsible for building all the airplanes that we build, and we're the third largest manufactured military airplanes in the United States. So B-21 stealth bomber, B-2 bomber, large portions of the F-35, large portions of the F-18, a lot of high altitude, long endurance, unmanned aircraft, unmanned helicopters, and a bunch of stuff that I can't actually tell you about. So it's a pretty cool job. It's a big part of the company. It's about $12 billion a year in revenues. I'm responsible for ensuring the well-being of about 24,000 employees. Okay, so why am I saying this? Not to blow my own horn. The reason I want to tell you about that is because I also, as was mentioned, serve in a lot of nonprofit capacities, young Catholic professionals. I like going out and talking to groups of people like you, and frequently the question I get is, wow, how can you be in a role like that in a big company and still be a Catholic? Is it hard? I'm serious. That's like probably the number one question I get when I'm talking to groups of Catholic youth. And so I decided, I think what I'll do today is I'll talk a little bit about that because, I'm the eternal optimist. I don't think it's that hard. And I want to give you guys some thoughts, things I've learned through the years, tell some stories, give you some hints. Really talking about, when you're a college student and you're looking for work, how do you find a company, that you think you'll be able to thrive in? Talk a little bit that you're just being a worker out there, you're working in the workplace, how do you stay true to your Catholic ideals? And then finally, talk a little bit about what it's like to be a leader that wants to stay close to their Catholic ideals, but working in a company that's not really a religious company, a largely secular, secular company. So that's what I'm going to go through today and try and finish in time so you guys can ask some questions on whatever you want to, okay? So I think the first thing to do if you're a college student looking for a place to work, and I did not do this when I hired out of college because I was an engineer, I was a nerd, loved technology. There's technology I wanted to work on and I went for that, right? But you need to, if you're really serious about your faith life, you need to understand the values and ethics of the company that you're going to go work for, right? So there's a number of ways you can do that. I'll go through some of them. I'd say first of all, there's websites like Glassdoor. There's another one I found called Corporate Rap Sheets that actually goes through and looks at the different backgrounds of companies, and you can get a feeling for the company there. I would warn you a little bit about some of those sources. Glassdoor's used by employees, oftentimes former employees of different companies. So generally, few people go on the internet to write about how happy they are with something, right? But if they just got let go or something like that, a lot of times they'll go to something like Glassdoor. So there's some information you can get there, but I'd take it with a grain of salt. Corporate Rap Sheets looks fairly good, but if you read it, basically it just talks about outstanding litigation or anything that's happened in the company before. So you can get some feel, but I'll tell you, I've now worked in 3 different companies, and all companies have ongoing litigation. It's just part of doing work in business. So it's interesting information. It can give you a feel, but I wouldn't make hard judgments based on that. I think from the perspective of living your faith in the workplace, there's 3 types of companies. There's religious companies. So I've had the opportunity in some of my young Catholic professionals appearances to, be with the CEO of EWTN, on a panel, and, it's very easy for the CEO of EWTN to live his faith, in the workplace, obviously, right? So there's always that avenue is open to someone that wants to have that experience. There's companies that, I would say are largely secular, and they come kind of across the spectrum in terms of working there. And then there's other companies, I'm not going to name anyone by name, but you guys probably have heard of some that are all more irreligious, right? Or have a tendency not to value that as much. Maybe they're just on one side of the spectrum of, secular on the extreme side. So I'd say what in my mind does a good company look like if you're not going to go to a faith-based company like a EWTN or a Sophia Press or something like that? In my mind, I think you're looking for a company, and there's a phrase for it out in the HR world. It says, you can bring your whole self to work, right? Now, I will tell you that you're probably no one, no matter what spectrum or, where they are, conservative, liberal, whatever, people rarely bring their whole self to work. However, you want to find a workplace where you're able to come in and not feel like you can't express or be yourself, on a regular basis. Not saying you have to talk about religion, but you just feel uneasy about the direction or the training or the things that are happening. So I think you're looking for a company that, finds a way to work down the middle and make all of their employees feel like they're valued, no matter what their background is, right? And that they're welcome in the workplace and the management cares about them. I personally think the company that I work at now is one of those companies, okay? So if you're looking for one of those companies, the question comes out, how do you go about actually finding something like that? Well, first of all, you can talk to family and friends if you're going into an industry that, your family and friends work in, and that's the best way. Hey, what do you think about this company? I'll tell you one of the things that gets me really excited about Northrop, it's a multi-generational company. That means, fathers, sons, sometimes even grandfathers, fathers, sons, or let me be equal opportunity, grandmothers and mothers and sons or whatever, right? All the different combinations out there. What that says to me, if you see a company like that, is, in some cases, yeah, it's a small town and it's the only place to work. But if it's a big company, what it means is, if you're a parent, it's a good enough company that you're willing to have your children work there. And if you're a child, you saw them treat your parent good enough that you want to work there, right? So a sign like that is a good sign. So family and friends, references, things like that, I think are good things to look for. You can reach out to people on LinkedIn as well. You can send them a message and, hey, I'm interested in coming to your company. Can you tell me what you think about it? Some people follow their LinkedIn a lot and they'll respond. It's worth a try. Another thing I thought of, you can go to a faith-based fund. So Ave Maria Funds is a mutual fund company that invests only in companies that extol Catholic values, right? So who does Ave Maria Funds back? What's the list of companies, right? There's another good way that you can find a number of companies. And then I think kind of, the final thing that struck me is you can look at who the top executives are. You can get their biographies. You can go to their LinkedIn pages, right? So Northrop, you go to the web page. I'm one of the 12 or something faces across the top of the web page for company leadership. You can find out, what do I do? What sort of nonprofits am I involved in, right? We actually, have one of my coworkers is out here today, Andrew Marr in the back, who recently reached out to me because he saw my LinkedIn has Legatus, the Catholic Business Executive Network on it, right? So if you go in there and you see that the executives in the company are willing to lay their faith out there and go, hey, I'm an executive of this company and I do this, it's probably a company where you can feel free to bring that to work. So not an exhaustive list, but just if you want to think about how do I research places to work so I'm more likely to find a place, those are some thoughts that I have there, okay? So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about, okay, you've got your job, you're working in a company, feeling fairly good about it. What are things to watch out for? What are things to do? Because once you get working, it's going to gets pretty intense. You get pretty busy. I know you're busy here, but trust me, you'll be more busy. So one thing I'd say, I'm so impressed with the level of faith I see in this room. But you are, in statistics, we say you're outliers, right? And you've had the opportunity for 4 years to live in this beautiful, environment. And if you go into a secular company, you're going to be mixing with people from all sorts of different backgrounds. Some of them, not only not religious, but hostily anti-religious. I'm not saying the whole organization, but you'll run into people in the workplace that are like that, right? So I think you need to understand that, but I'd also say that in every workplace, you're also going to find people like you, particularly in large companies, right? I'll tell you, I know of good, very devout Catholics in all levels of the company that I work with. There are people like that are, at my level in the senior portions of the corporate hierarchy. There's people who support me on my team right now who work for me that fall into that category. There's people that I've run into, that work for me many layers down. So I'll give you a few examples. One of the things I like to do is lead book clubs on leadership and leadership principles, and we read, books about various historical leaders, and we talk about what can we learn about this to be better in the workplace. And I was doing one of these in Baltimore last year. No, it would have to be before last year because we actually got together as a group, and that didn't happen last year, right? So before last year we did this, and I looked down at the gentleman who was sitting beside me, and he had a saint card that he was using for a bookmark. So after it was done, I was like, what saint is that? And he goes, and I forget what saint it is, but is a saint who had been martyred in North Africa. Tells me the whole story, and I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And then he goes, yeah, I actually, was in the priesthood for a while, and I adopted this. This was the priest that, inspired me to go into the priesthood, and then found it wasn't my vocation. I dropped out. And I said, that's fine, and ended up, so he's like, okay, it sounds like maybe the boss is Catholic, so he kind of, are you Catholic? And I said, yeah, I'm Catholic, absolutely, and had a little conversation and things like that, and talked a little bit about prayer. And I said, yeah, actually, as it turns out, every morning when I drive into work, it's a half an hour. It's just the perfect time for me to do my mental prayer, say a rosary, and it's been a long day. Another set of prayers. Anyways, it might come back to me later. Anyways, I pray on the way into work, right? And he was like, you gotta be kidding me. I pray the rosary on the way into work too. I was like, okay, well now we've got this bond, so when you're driving into work, remember me and your rosary, and I'll remember you and your rosary. He's like, yeah, cool, right? So you'll run into incidences like this, and to me, that's the perfect kind of thing, and you can strike up those conversations, and then you have these ties with people in the workplace, right? I'll tell you also, I'm a convert to Catholicism, okay? I was raised a Lutheran. I married a Catholic. I agreed to be married in the church. I went to church with my wife every weekend because it was the right thing to do, because I was a Christian, just not a Catholic. I was convinced Catholicism had serious theological errors and was never going to become Catholic. And about 2 years into our marriage, my wife said, hey, there's a apologetics class at the church for the next 12 weeks. Do you want to go? I'm like, yeah, I'll go, because I'm really good at debating, right? And I'm going to convert all these Catholics into being Lutherans. This is the worst idea these guys have ever come up with, right? So I went to one, and it was like being taught by a priest and a deacon, and here's the thing that really got me, by a converted Protestant pastor who, in order to convert, had to give up his whole livelihood, right? All of his training, his degree in Protestant theology wasn't going to get him anything, right? Lost his home, all that. And I was like, wow, I need to listen to this, right? So, long story short, about three sessions in, I left. I'm like, oh no, I've got to become a Catholic. So, it was a long road from there. I won't tell you, I tried to get into several RCI classes. I got into one where it was pretty weird, and I was like, hey, I'm not a Catholic, but even I am pretty sure that is not Catholic theology, so I'm not going to go to that, right? And then one day I'm on a business trip, and I was in a car. I was like a low-level manager at the time, and I was with the director. He wasn't my director, but he was like a director of a parallel organization. And we're driving around, and, started talking about what did we do that morning, all right? Because it was a Sunday or something like that, and, I went to church, blah, blah, blah. Really, where'd you go to church at, right? Oh, I went to San Antonio. He goes, I go to San Antonio. Oh, you're Catholic? Yeah, so we start going back and forth, and he goes, I didn't know you're Catholic. Well, actually, I'm not Catholic, and I go through the story, and I tell him about this fuzzy theology at the last church we went to, and he's like, yeah, that's not right, So, anyways, I was like, yeah, I've been wanting to get into RCI, and I can't do it. And then he was like, you know what? I've been wanting to get into RCIA as a sponsor. Why don't you let me sponsor you? So we ended up doing exactly that. I got into RCIA, entered the church with this guy who was this big shot boss at my work. It all came up, again, just kind of like, the guy that worked for me, just in this conversation. The last thing I'll throw out there, I also do, to keep in touch with my folks, I do these video blogs every couple of weeks. Usually on empowerment, leadership, things like that. And I get email feedback every now and then. I got an email just about 2 weeks ago from this guy. And he was very clearly religious. His email picture was a guy like this, and it was like, praise God on the picture. And, it was basically just saying, hey, I really like this. This is about real leadership. thank you for doing this, right? And in the email it goes, I pray that you'll be successful in this, right? And I send them back, hey, thank you very much. I want you to know every day I drive into work, I pray that I can do my job, and I'm glad that you're praying for me too, Thanks, right? So I'm telling you these little vignettes because if you think about big companies, you just don't think about these things. And it's not super prevalent, but you can go into big companies, you can form these bonds, you can form these relationships, and there's nothing wrong with it in my mind. And I'm always very open about, my religion and, what it means to me and in my life, and it's helped me strike up good conversations with folks. So just a thought. I'd also say, I'm big, I like reading some of the works of St. Jose Maria Escriva, right? Who, the whole Opus Dei thing is about how regular lay people can sanctify themselves through work, right? So I'm big on the concept of you can go to any job. You can be a street sweeper, or you can be, some guy in a suit like me. And by working hard, by practicing the virtues, you're setting an example for others. You're bringing them closer, right? By being happy, by being joyful in what you do, you can do these things, right? And you can bring yourself closer to God, and hopefully you can bring those around you closer to God. Not necessarily without ever actually having to get into conversations about that. I think one of the things you want to do is look particularly at the Cardinal Virtues, right, which are, I had to write them down, prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance, right? Those are all things that are of great value in the workplace. And there are things, frankly, that a lot of people in the workplace don't have, right? Or they've got some of them, but they don't have all of them. It's hard to have all those things. So if you can make yourself about, hey, I want to go out and I want to live the Cardinal Virtues, then you are making yourself an excellent worker, right? Prudence, good judgment, right? That's willingness to take risks, but not too much, right? And being able to form good decisions. I tell you as a boss, I love people that are prudent decision makers because I spend most of my time working with the results of non-prudent decisions, right? Justice, right? Is everyone being treated fairly? But justice is also gratitude. As I was poking around on the internet last night, I came up with, in Ave Maria, they've got these newsletters that come out, so Ave Maria Funds, they've got newsletters. They had Tom Moynihan, the founder of Domino's Pizza, who is devout Catholic and set up Ave Maria Funds and Ave Maria University. He had something in there, actually a newsletter, talking about the use of gratitude as a tool for leading people, and he proposed a book, which I'm going to listen to as I drive down to Florida this weekend, right? But having that makes you a good leader, makes you, someone people want to work with. And it's also, again, founded in the way we as Catholics want to be, right? Fortitude, having patience, being able to persevere. You run into a lot of difficult situations at work. And again, showing these basic virtues, living by them, makes you an excellent employee and also has you living in accordance with the way God wants us to live in the workplace. And it sanctifies us, right? Finally, temperance. So of course that means don't drink at work, right? So, right, that's obvious. But, I go on, it's about conscience, it's about humility, it's about, meekness to an extent, right? Not being overly aggressive. In the business world, you can't be overly meek either because you have to stand up for yourself, right? So, why can we bring people closer to God by acting out the cardinal virtues in the workplace? The reason is because when you see someone act with virtue, it speaks to your heart, right? It's natural law. It's those things that are imprinted on us that we know are right and good, right? And unless there are cases where some people are not attracted by natural law, but it's only in very rare circumstances. For the most case, people are drawn to it just naturally, which is the beautiful thing about it. There's a handful of secular things that I find inspiring and I think talk to these virtues. In my office, I have the poem If by Rudyard Kipling hanging in there. I love that. I've loved it since high school. The one I've got hanging in my office, I actually got for my high school graduation present. And I'll tell you, I've been through, I've been through some tough business situations where having it up there on the wall and being able to read, you know, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves, it's like, okay, got to do that, right? And it just goes with thing after thing after thing. The first book of the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, I think, is like the most inspiring analysis of gratitude, you know, for people who've helped you in your life. So things like that, you know, speak to my heart. And when you go out and you act in those ways in the workplace, it speaks, your actions speak to the heart of others. So, you know, how does that go in the world of big business? I was in a very difficult negotiation several years ago. It was for several billions worth of dollars. We were working with another contractor. It was at a very, very complex stage, right, where people were getting mad, emotions were very high. So one thing I do, I just started doing lately, you'd think I would have been doing it all my life, I take these things to prayer, I take business problems to prayer, right? And something would happen, we'd get the next counter offer in the negotiation, and the first thing would be, look at what those guys did. Can you believe this? Right, and I'm like, okay, hold on, let me go in my office. What do you do? Walk out, let's sit on it for a day, right? Tried to bring the balance back into the whole thing. We still weren't converging, and finally, and I don't want to identify contracts or you know, companies or anything, which is why I'm being vague, and possibly it's a bad story, but anyways. So it finally got to the point where, you know, I was going to have to make a very significant threat that could impact the manufacturing line of this company that we were trying to do. And I was like, look, I'm going to go out, I'm going to talk to my counterpart face to face, and, you know, I'm going to base this whole thing, well, what are you going to say? I say, I'm going to base this whole thing on fairness. And I remember my financial guy going, fairness, this is business, what are you talking about? And I'm like, no, this is an issue of basic fairness. And I'm just going to lay it out that, you know, we'll be hard-knuckled negotiators, but we're not going to be taken advantage of, because it's not fair. And I flew out, and I met in the lobby of the office for 15 minutes. I delivered my message. The guy shook his head, understand. I flew back. It was a long flight for 15 minutes, both ways in one day. But bottom line is, they decided that they were going to come back and negotiate. So, you know, I bring this up because people think that you get into these high-stakes types of deals and you can't go to basic issues of fairness and justice. I think you can. And, you know, that's not the only time I've appealed to the virtues in a difficult business situation. So I just leave that out for you. How are we doing on time? Okay, I'll tell two more stories, okay? So, workaholism, bad thing. Very easy to get sucked into, particularly if you're really, really, you know, a driving person. You're passionate about the work you do. You've got to keep things in balance. At the very start of my career, I ended up growing a business from about 12 people, $2 million a year, to a couple hundred people, and quite a few $1 million a year. I can't remember what it was, but it was big, and it happened like in a 2-year time frame. It was all kind of, I did not get a lot of money to go do that. I just had good relationships with the customers and good relationships with the team that worked for me, and we just won all this stuff. Frequently, I wasn't even given the money to go write these proposals that we were winning. So the deal was, my team and I would work our day job from 9 to 5, and then we'd work from 5 until 11 or midnight for free, writing proposals so that we could win more business, right? And I did this literally for like 2 years. I had a daughter who was about 3 at the time, and the deal was, I'd work from 9 till about 6, I'd go home, I'd eat dinner, see my daughter, go back to work around 7:30 or 8, work till midnight or 1, go home, go to bed, get up, do it again. That was Monday through Saturday. Sunday was different. Sunday, I'd go to church, I would come home, my parents would come over, we'd have a barbecue, and then I'd get up and go to work at about 1:30, and I'd stay at work until 11 o'clock, and then I'd get up and I'd start the week over again. And that was my life, just nonstop. So one day, towards the end of all this, sitting there, it's a beautiful spring day like today, we're in Southern California, and it wasn't really necessary for me to go to work. And I was talking to my dad, I said, you know what? I think I'm not gonna go to work today. So I got up, went to the fridge and got a second beer. I sat down and my 3-year-old daughter's like, Daddy, you need to go to work now. I'm like, no, it's okay, I'm not gonna go to work. Go back to talking to my dad. A couple minutes later, she goes, Daddy, you need to go to work now. And I'm like, no, Dad's not going to work today, okay? It's all right. Go back to talking to my dad. A minute or two later, I look over and she is sitting there crying. And I'm like, darling, what is wrong? And she's like, you tell me what's wrong. It's Sunday, and on Sunday, we go to church, and then we have a barbecue, and then you go to work, and you're not going to work now. You know, children have a way of bringing the imbalance in life into focus, and that was one of two, I won't tell you the other one, but that was one of two incidents that really made me look and go, you know, you have to know what your limits are. And there are times, and what separates good entrepreneurs from people who burn out, good entrepreneurs understand when you have to go all in, all out, and push, and do everything to be successful. But good entrepreneurs also know when to stop. People that burn out don't know. And, you know, I'm not saying I'm a great entrepreneur, I've done fairly good at it, but only because I had a 3-year-old daughter that was able to shine, you know, a little light of, you know, whip out some, you know, 3-year-old wisdom on me there. So that's workaholism. The other thing I've done, you know, throughout from about the time I was 30 onwards, is to have a life plan, which I actually update like every 3 to 5 years. Usually I use a technique that came out of a book from back in the 80s called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And you sit down and you think of all the different roles you have in life, you know, husband, father, Catholic, boss, whatever those things are that you do. You look at what you want to do, and it's just like this audit of your life and what's important to you. And I got in the habit of doing this, and the reason I say I do it every 3 to 5 years is because your life changes, and things that are important in one period of your life suddenly are not. And up until the time I was about 34, 35, it was always, you know, I want to go compete in this triathlon, and I want to win this big program and get this, you know, it's all, you know, it's me, right? You know, a little bit of my family and kids, right? And then I was really miserable in the job I was in at the time. I was thinking about going to work somewhere else. I was making everyone in my life miserable. I'd come home, complain to my wife, and just really low. And my dad was also very sick. He was in the hospital. We thought he could die. And I ended up doing my reflection by his hospital bed. And suddenly, it was like, what am I doing, right? My kids are young, I'm coaching them in soccer, that's good, right? I'm with my dad, hopefully he'll recover, if not, I can be here when he dies. And I'm complaining about my job. It's like, you know, suck it up, buttercup, right? So, you know, going through that process helped me define what was really important for me. And I quit complaining when I came home. I went to work, it was still miserable, right? But it's like, I'm not doing it for this, I'm doing it for the family, right? Got through it. The same process took me to a point where about 10 years later, I came to the conclusion I was going to leave that job and go to another job, and I came to Northrop, and it was really great. It wasn't miserable the whole time I was there. I don't want to give you that impression, but you know, I came to a point that, hey, what I'm doing, been doing it a long time, I want to go do something else. The final place where this really came into play in a big way, I went through this process like last spring, and I was on a path where I thought I knew exactly where my life was going. I may or may not at some point become a sector president. If I do, it's going to be in Maryland. Paid my house off, so I have a place to retire in a few years, and I was set. Just sit down and wait to either retire or get a promotion, and that was it. And then I get a phone call from our CEO. Aeronautics president has, retired. We'd like you to take the job. Okay, can I think about it? Well, yeah, but at this level, the fact that a sector president is gone is reportable to the SEC, and you only have 72 hours before you have to issue a press release, and I'd like to say whether or not you'll take the job, which by the way entailed moving across the country and a lot of other complexities. So I need an answer in like 36, 48 hours. Can you do that? And I was like, we'll see, right? And it was difficult because I got aging parent, complex situations with kids, other things, right? Figuring out how to do this. And at the end of it, I took those values that I'd gone over with my wife that I wanted to do, and I sat and I said, okay, we need to figure out two things. Is this lined up with the values and the goals that I have? And the second thing, which is really important, is this from God or from somewhere else, right? Because if it's something that comes from God, all these difficulties will work out, right? If it's not, well, I've got bigger problems then, right? So we prayed on it, reflected, and you heard I'm in the role, so you know how the story ended, right? But the short part of it is, I find having these things where you reflect on what you want to do and what is important to you incredibly useful in bringing focus into the major decisions in your life. Okay, I'm going to take just a couple seconds. I'm going to talk about being a business leader, and then I'll take some questions. So, as a business leader, I still think it's possible, and I think I do this to reflect the Catholic social teachings and values that I've been given, and do it in a way that is not imposing my religion on anyone else. Because, again, good, virtuous leadership is usually good leadership, right? So what's the foundation of Catholic social teaching and business? It's the fundamental dignity of the human being, right? So if you're out there thinking about your workers, thinking about your customers, thinking about your shareholders, thinking about each of them and the problems that they deal with and trying to find a way to find the best path through that, that's considering the dignity of the human being first, and it's also fundamental tenet of Catholic social teaching, right? The other one, manage businesses for the long run. There's companies out there that, in the past, some companies that have been through big scandals, managed to quarterly earnings results to get big stock prices, things like that, right? When you're looking for a company, look for a company that manages for the long run. And if you're a leader, manage for the long run as well. Yeah, you've got to get short-term results, but you always want to make sure that you're managing for the health of the business and something that's going to be out there 10, 15, 20 years later when you're long gone. There's something called empowerment that I mentioned. Empowerment is basically the business version of subsidiarity, right? It's how can I get people at the lowest level the resources they need and the control they need to go solve a problem. That's also the best way to lead teams and lead projects, is to get a group of people, make sure they know what the objective is, make sure they have the resources, the training, the authority, the whatever to get the job done. And then when you meet with them, you're not coming in as a boss and going, you take 2 steps over there, you stand up, you sit down, right? You come in and it's, how are you doing against your goals? What's your problems? How can I help you, right? Subsidiarity, empowerment, good business practice. And then the last part I always kind of mention is to try and make yourself a servant leader, right? Once you empower the teams, you set the course, you give them the resources, After that, it's just about making sure they can do what they need to do. So I got a bunch more crazy stories that I could tell, or boring stories that I could tell, one or the other, right? But I want to leave some time for questions. So with that, again, you can work for whoever you want to. If you want to work for a faith-based company, that's great. If you want to work for a secular company, you can at any level of the organization, from entry level to someone like me. I think you can continue to live your Catholic values there. Thank you.
All right, who's got questions? I'll look for you, Jack.
What's the most important thing you look for in an employee?
So the question was, what is the most important thing I look for in an employee? I think passion. I like someone who's passionate about what they're going to do. Like I said, I got into what I was doing because I was really passionate about it. I actually went out on my own money to a conference to try and get a job, and I got hired for that reason. The guy that hired me, it was like, you flew out all the way out here on your own money and you're making grad student wages? You must want the job, we'll give it to you, right? I'd say if there's not a passion to work in a certain field of business, I think, just being well-rounded, having a well-rounded background, it's hard for me to put my finger on it. Looking for character, I guess, which I think all of you have a lot going for you in that particular category based on your background. So I'm sorry. Hopefully that was enough for you. Okay.
You mentioned in your bio that you co-produced a documentary on physician-assisted suicide. I was just wondering if you could say anything about how to pursue a PA degree and still remain your Catholicity and thrive in an environment like that.
PA is?
Physician assistant. So did you co-author or co-produce a documentary?
Yeah, so, and that's another reason, by the way, why I love my company, because, I am a fairly high-profile person, and for them to allow me to go out and speak on a socially sensitive subject on my own time is really cool. Yeah, so I mean, basically, my wife and I got into this, we oppose physician-assisted suicide very strongly. We got into the subject. One of my children's bipolar, went through a very difficult adolescence, suicidal for a number of years. This bill came up in the state of Maryland. We looked at it from a standpoint of, this is going to make more troubled teens, people with psychiatric disorders want to kill themselves. We ended up testifying at the State House, telling our story. Basically, I won't go through the whole story because over a period of years, we went from basically testifying to going all over the state of Maryland on our free time, doing panel presentations, setting up information sessions on why physician-assisted suicide is wrong, right? And how you can go and argue with your legislators, again, secular arguments because they don't listen to any faith-based arguments, right? But all the things why it's wrong. And we basically went from that to writing a documentary because we didn't have enough time to go to all the churches, to setting up a nonprofit to distribute the documentary, and then ultimately we got enough people stirred up with the documentary wanting to do things, we became grassroots lobbyists. So we're also registered lobbyists on that particular issue in Maryland. So, that's kind of, I look at it as another way to serve, right? God's given us the means to invest. He's given us the organizational skills that, in addition to just working and getting a good wage and giving money to the church, if we can go address social issues that are important to the church and give our leadership in those ways, then we'll do it, and that's kind of our thing. Okay?
if you find yourself in a position where you have to fire an employee, how do you kind of deal with that internally, that someone's losing their job even though it's a necessity because they're not cutting edge at work?
Yeah, I've had to fire very few people, actually. You know, I think the first step in not being in a situation, a lot of times if someone is actually severed, it's because they've done something just blatantly wrong, right? It's not a performance issue. If you're doing your job as a manager or a leader, you're giving constant feedback, right? And it's the way you give feedback is you don't make it about the person. You either make it about results, right? You know, you're in this job, we need this level of results, you're giving this. What can we do to make sure that you can make it to the standard, right? And you have discussions like that. Or if it's behavior, hey, you're in this job, you're behaving in this manner, it's really not a reflectance of the values that we need. I need you to behave like this. Is there something I can do to help you with that? Because I have to hold you to this standard, right? And you have that discussion early. And then you just monitor it. And if you get to a point where that person can't do that, then you say, is this person in the right role? So you don't necessarily have to fire me. Then the conversation is like, you know, okay, it does not look like you maybe have the temperament for this, or it looks like this is stretching you a little bit. Let's move you to a place where you can be successful, right? So most of the scenario, and don't get me wrong, that can still be a difficult discussion that people don't like to hear, but if you keep it unemotional and keep it about performance and behaviors and meeting standards and trying to work with them, it's less hard. There are situations where, you know, you do have to have layoffs because, you know, decreasing work or things like that. I've gone through those scenarios in my career, and it's unfortunate, but you just have to say, you know, if you don't do this, it's going to be a burden on the company. We won't be able to invest in things that will help us grow, and then we'll have to lay off more people because we're not growing, right? So that's like a common good type of thing, and you never feel good about it, but you have to keep the common good of the enterprise, plus your customers, plus your shareholders, right? Because you're supporting all of those folks. Answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a two-part question. Given the current climate that we're in the corporate environment towards conservatism and Catholicism, how would you suggest getting your foot in the door at a big corporation and then thriving while still living your Catholic values? And then the second part of the question, how do you discern the kinds of companies that you can work at in good conscience?
Okay, so I tried to hit on some of those points in the talk. I'll go back and I'll hit them again real quick. So, you know, I think if you can go work for a faith-based company, right? There's Sophia Press, there's, you know, EWTN, there's a lot of places, and that's easy, right? If you work for a secular company, you know, I'd say try and understand the values of the company, and there's a number of ways you can do that. Family and friends, looking at Ave Maria, you know, looking at their executives and what their executives do in their free time, right? Okay. Once you get your foot in the door, it's all about, I think, behaving in accordance with our Catholic values, with the Cardinal Virtues, working hard, right, and being honest, being prudent, all those things, and you will thrive, okay?
Personally speaking, what have you found to be the best way to interact and form deeper relationships with people who might not share your faith? Like, for example, like talking about sports or personal experiences, just when there's not that common bond of religion.
Yeah, you know, so family's always good, right? Everyone's got a family, and probably 99.99% of them love their family. So, you know, that's probably a good spot. Everybody likes to talk about themselves, right? everyone thinks they are the most interesting person, right? So if you want to start a conversation, it's like, hey, what do you do? What are your hobbies? Things like that. And then you can find where there's some sort of common ground there that you can work on. Okay?
Anybody else? Yes.
How do you recommend sharing your faith, or how much should you share your faith with other people around you and admonish? So like admonish the sinner to work of mercy, how much should you do it and how should you do that?
So, I personally am very careful about how I do that, because being in an influential position, you never want it to come across like you're trying to be intimidating to someone, trying to press your beliefs on that someone. It's a little bit easier if you're not in a place of, influence or power. But I think depending on the size of the company, some people still don't necessarily want you necessarily going out and doing that. So, some of the stories I mentioned before where you notice things, hey, what'd you do yesterday? Well, I went to church and, we had this thing, and then maybe the conversation goes from there, right? I mean, that's the guy that converted me to Catholicism. Well, he didn't convert me, but he got me into RCIA, right? It started off with that exact same conversation. What'd you do yesterday? I went to church. Where'd you go? I go there too. Are you Catholic? No. Can't get in RCIA. I'll get you in, right? So just by virtue of these conversations, showing interest in people, you will find these touch points, right? You will, you just will, right? Andrew found it by looking on my LinkedIn network and going, hey, I'm gonna send that guy email, right? I found out about it, someone that works for me because they told me where their kids went to school. And it's like, oh, you Catholic? Yeah, okay, yeah, so am I, okay, right? So, I'd say just, it's gonna happen and normal. I think you don't want to be in a situation where you're trying to force it. The world is full of opportunities to evangelize, and I personally think you can do it again just by going out there, being a stand-up person, treating everyone, like they're a person, and, it'll happen.
So what's the least favorite job that you've ever held? And how long did you stay? How did you know it wasn't for you? Get out of it?
The least favorite job I've ever held. Okay. So this is probably not a really good example, but when I was in graduate school, I was positive I was going to get a graduate research assistantship for the summer. I already had a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, and I did not get a graduate research assistantship. So I had to work as a temp for the summer. And the second job they sent me to was to be a receptionist at an electrical engineering firm. And in the office hierarchy, a receptionist is below a secretary. And secretaries, or those secretaries at least, thought it was hilarious that they had a fully degreed electrical engineer in grad school working for them. And additionally, I did not know how to operate the phones. So I was constantly disconnecting people. I remember this one guy called up. I disconnected him twice as I tried to transfer the call. He called up a third time and said, put the phone down, walk back to their cubicle and ask them to come to the phone, right? So it was like that bad. So I knew I was not doing good. And finally, it was a relatively small engineering firm. The boss came out and he sat down on the desk and he's like, so Tom, how do you think it's going? I was like, it's not going good. He goes, you're an engineer, huh? I'm like, yeah. He goes, you know anything about forklift power systems? Because they're doing a proposal on that. I was like, not a thing. I goes, what do you think we should do? And I said, I think you should probably fire me is what I'm thinking, and get someone in here that knows how to operate the phones. He was like, I think so too. I was like, would you like me to finish out the day? And he's like, nah, you can leave now. So now The upside of that is the next job I took was working as a stock clerk at an IBM repair facility in Dallas. And my job was to take all these scrap parts and restock them in order. And when you went in, it was like that whole wall was full of boxes and stacked to the top. And I was like, that's horrible. And it's like, yeah, it's always like that. It's never been, you know, it maybe got down to 2/3 of that. So I go, okay, I got 2 weeks before I go back to school. My goal is I'm going to empty that wall out, right? And I just work, you know, and wall was coming down, and people come in, and I was like, wow, that's like really good. And then I finally got to a point where I actually got the whole wall, it was clean, and I sat down, I had nothing left to do. I finished the whole wall. It was like 2 days before I left to go back to school. And the boss of that place came in, goes, so Tom, this is pretty good. I'm like, yeah, thank you, I'm pretty happy about it. And he goes, well, I understand you're a temp. Would you like to stay on as a full-time stock boy for us? And that was when I had to say, actually, I got to go finish my master's degree, so sorry, I can't do that, right? But so there was a up, you know, I hit my low, and then I kind of hit a high. But, you know, it was, and I guess to take it out of the stupid story realm, maybe the moral there is, you know, you work with diligence and try to work excellently, even though you're just stocking boxes, right? Which goes back to living your Catholic values. Although I wasn't Catholic then, but I guess, I don't know, I was wired in from birth.
Yes.
You mentioned that you were an entrepreneur. Could you speak a little, just a couple of tips on how to get started as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I was kind of odd because I was always in the confines of a big company, you know, but I basically did a commercial joint venture spin out that was funded by Boeing, and formed a joint venture with some commercial companies for a couple of years, which was really interesting. I don't know if I've got good advice for that. I mean, in general, I think entrepreneurs are people who look, you know, you find problems and you go, oh, I know something I could take and I could apply to fix that problem. So I'm not sure I got any really good advice. I mean, the main thing is get out. If there's a field you want to work in, get out. Understand the customers, understand the problems that they have, right? Because any entrepreneurial concept is based on something they call a value proposition, right? Which is, you have this problem, I can take this approach and I can apply it to this, and I can do it in, you know, half the time that it takes you to do it now. And generally, the way you pay for that is you say, it costs you $100 to do it in 2 hours. I can let you do it in, you know, 1 hour, which would cost $50. So we're going to split the savings, and I'll save you this new thing for like $75. So you're always trying to find a way that you can take a difficult problem, bring value to it, and then share in the reward that comes from it, right? So I guess the hint would be, get out there, understand the problem space, understand your customers, their problems, and then go find a way to try and solve their problem. Is that good enough for you?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
How open would you say secular companies are to people who've been employed in faith-based companies like to start?
Secular companies are most of them, the ones that I mentioned before that, you know, want a balance and, you know, don't have overtly political views. So if they're a well-balanced company, you're just looking at the skill set. Is the person good? Can they do the job? Can they do it efficiently? It's economics 101, right? Okay?
Do you have other questions? All right, well, please thank Tom for